Hi students, welcome to the PowerPoint Composing an Annotated Bibliography. I wanted to start here with your assignment and talk about some of the requirements that are part of this assignment. So the whole point of this assignment is to find a topic that is debatable, researchable, and sustainable for our purposes. So debatable meaning different people have differing points of view about it. Sustainable meaning that you can find the required amount of sources for it. So for our assignment, it's 10 sources. You can find both popular and scholarly sources on it. Part of what your assignment asks you to do, so we have to find a topic that can meet those requirements, and also a topic that's sustainable. So like I said, with the 10 sources, and will allow us to write approximately a 6-page argument paper on it in the end. So your guidelines are listed in Blackboard. You want to make sure to look those over, and part of this assignment involves submitting to me 2 possible research questions that are debatable, researchable, socially or politically significant, and interesting to you, right? Because you don't want to read and write about something that's not interesting to you. Studies show, although it should be common sense, that students write better and they're more effective in their prose when they're writing about something that they're interested in. So hopefully we can find you something. So after you submit those 2 questions to me, I'm only going to I might approve both of them, but you're only going to pursue one of those questions. I say submit 2 just in case you run into problems with one, and then you have a backup question, because it can be very time consuming for us to go back and forth saying, oh, that question won't work, can you submit another one? You submit another one, I have to look at it. So submitting 2 at once just kind of speeds up the process and makes it more likely that you're going to get an approved question that's useful. I like the 2 quotations here about the annotated bibliography. I see this assignment actually as being one of the most fun assignments, because hopefully you're reading about something that really interests you, and you're reading differing perspectives on it. So you're hearing about people thinking different ways. So if we're talking about a topic like, I know one of my students before had pursued this, are C-sections a viable option for birth? She was pregnant and she was concerned about whether or not to have a C-section and all these things, so she wanted to research that, and there were lots of differing opinions about how good for you or not a C-section is, and why there's been such a rise in C-sections and things like that. So as she's going through this process, she's hearing different authorities talk about why they think it is fine or why it is not, and she's situating herself in the middle of this, or aligning herself with one or the other side. So it could be extreme. She might be aligning herself with doctors who say, yes, C-sections are fine, they're very healthy, they're actually safer than traditional birth. They're a good option for mothers today. Or she might be finding herself aligning more with like the La Leche League and people saying, no, there are too many C-sections being performed and doctors are too ready to just cut into a woman's body and complications can arise very easily. And they're just doing it because they can make more money, they can fit more births in, and it's easier for them, and those kind of things. So I see this as the fun part, because you get to find out what you believe. You might read a source and go, oh my gosh, I totally agree with what this author said about X. And then you might read another source and go, I don't agree with what this person said, or I agree with this thing they said in the beginning but not in the end. And I see that again as fun, because I feel like we're finding out about ourselves. We're finding out, it's like those BuzzFeed quizzes that are so much fun, what kind of plant would you be if you were a plant, or what 80s movie are you? But this is even more important. This is bigger, right? It's what do you believe? What do you think? Who are you? What do you value? What assumptions do you share with these authorities? So this is the kind of research you're going to be doing. And the PowerPoint I have here, hopefully this will work. I'm putting up the PowerPoint and starting it. The PowerPoint goes through the process, right? You find a topic, you compose a research question about that topic, and this may or may not shapeshift as we go through our semester. You find sources, and for our purposes, I say you want to find a minimum of 10. You have to find at least one book. And when I say you have to find a book, I don't mean that you have to read the whole entire book. You can choose to read a chapter. If it's an ebook, sometimes you can do like a Control F. You can find the sections that deal with the issue you're interested in. So for instance, if you're interested in whether or not college football should be banned, and you're not as much interested in like the safety aspect of whether it should be banned, so the concussions and injuries and things like that, but you're really interested in if it should be banned because there's, you know, a lot more potential for academic dishonesty and academic distraction with football. Well, you might look in that book and only want to read the parts that deal with academic dishonesty or academic distraction. So when I say I want you to find a book, it's mainly because I want you to be able to use the library catalog. I don't want you to graduate from our institution and then someone says, oh, I never had to use the library books. I never checked one out of there in the whole 2 years I was there. And then you won't have any idea when you go on to another institution how to do it. So read and analyze those sources. So I do expect you to read them, not just the abstracts, not just skim them, but to read the sources. And you're going to analyze them for certain criteria that we'll get to in a minute. Create citations for those sources. So we're dealing with MLA format, works cited kind of citations. So you can use the library handout or your Little Seagull for that. If you're still using Little Seagull, maybe you have another handbook. But hopefully this will work as I'm going over here. I'm going to LSSC. And the library has a really great MLA handbook, or little handout. I'm in the library website, and then I go to Citation Center under Research Help and click on that. Then up here by MLA handouts, there's the MLA citation guide. Click on that. And this is very lengthy, but it's great because it gives so many examples for works cited entries. It talks about basic citations, examples of books, print books, ebooks, and depending on if you open an ebook and it's in EBSCO, then you use this format. But if it's in eBrary, you use this format. So it even gives you the format for each particular kind of database that you open it in. And the databases, remember, these are just places. They're like cyber hangouts, cyber mini libraries, right? Where all these books and articles hang out. And a lot of these things like EBSCO, they're just names of the companies that own these databases and operate them and enter this data. So that's what all those different things are. And I'm not going to go through everything here, but as I scroll down, if you're not getting dizzy, you can see that there are a lot of different formats broken down: newspapers, magazines, and then page 11 I think is good. Oh, that's website examples, but I wanted to go to page, where is it? I thought it was earlier than this, but maybe not. They give each database, they give an example for each one. Here it is on page 17. Specific database examples, and they're in alphabetical order. So if you found a source through Academic Search Complete, it formats that for you. And as the librarian noted, a lot of these sources may have a citation generator attached to them where you can just click MLA citation and it'll give you the citation. Just double check it, please, because sometimes they'll include the URLs and you don't need them. Sometimes they'll include information that you shouldn't include, or they won't capitalize the first letter of major words in the title. They're little things. But why get points deducted for that? So that's the library's MLA handout that I think is super helpful. Let me go back to our PowerPoint here. So that's where we can get the citations. The annotations, annotation is just for a word for the paragraph underneath each citation. And if you look through the sample student annotated bibliographies like I asked you to, you should have seen those. I'm going to show you another one in a minute, but the annotation is just the citation, then the annotation. So you're going to have 10 citations and 10 annotations. And it's going to go citation, annotation, citation, annotation. We are going to have a rough draft submission. So I believe, I don't want to say this and pin myself down because I can't remember at this moment, but I believe it's something like 3 sources, or it may even be half of your annotated bibliography, 5, I can't remember at this point, where I ask you to submit, you know, just a few sources cited and annotated so I can give you feedback and say, yes, you're on the right track, or no, that wasn't what I asked for at all, before we get to the final draft. As you're going along, please find some kind of method of organization. I used to bookmark files, you know, or articles or web links that I found were helpful, but I've learned that I have so many bookmarks now that's not really that effective anymore. I need to go in and create subfolders and things like that. What works for me best when I'm working on a project or something is I make a folder in my email. I have an email I use for work and an email I use just for home, but my work email I'll just put a folder and then I'll label it, sorry my dog is jingle-jangling in the background here, and I'll label it ENC 2300 research or whatever the project I'm working on is. And when I go and I find something, even if I'm like, I'm not sure I'm going to use this, and I'm tempted to just leave it behind, I go and I send that link to myself, or I, you know, if it's in the databases, I just say email this whole article to myself, and then I stash it in that folder, because there have been many times when I've thought, oh, I don't need that, and then later on I think, oh, where did I read that? I wish I had that. What? And I'm like looking through all my sources and I can't find it. So I would just say anything that looks potentially good, find a place to keep it as you're going through the research process and house it there. You want to find sources that are biased as well as those that are objective. So biased means argumentative, right? So if your research question is something like, you know, should women get paid maternity leave, or should parents get paid maternity leave in the United States? Then you want to find sources that argue, yes, they should, sources that argue, no, they shouldn't, maybe sources that are just objective, reporting on the history of, you know, paid leave in the United States or in other countries. And there's no number to this, right? You don't have to have 5 objective sources and 5 argumentative, or 5 yes and 5 no. You just want to have a variety, because a lot of times you're not going to be able to find balanced number of sources in the research. If we're talking about, you know, what are the causes of obesity, you might find, you know, 7 sources that talk about technology and its influence on making us more sedentary and that causing obesity, and only 3 that talk about genetics or something like that. So you're not going to find, or you might find it, but don't beat yourself up trying to find it. You also want to find, you know, some scholarly sources. Like I said, try to keep your research organized. If you think you may want to use a source, then go ahead and use it, or not use it, but add it to your list just in case. These are the kinds of things that you're going to pull out of your source. And I would say, as you're reading your sources, this is what's going to take the longest part with this assignment, is you're reading the source itself. Now, some sources, some articles might be 2 pages, and isn't that nice and easy? But those scholarly sources are often a lot longer. I mean, we're talking about upwards of 20, 25, 30 pages. So when I say I want you to read it and then I want you to go back and analyze it, that's going to be a time-consuming process. Plus, you have to cite it and create the paragraph. So we're talking about, you know, when we've done this in class, this will take us, with one article, a full 80 minutes. Now, again, I'm usually working with a source that's a bit heftier, that's something like 10 pages, and students are doing it for the first time. So that takes longer, but please don't procrastinate on this assignment because it's not, I don't think it's really that hard of an assignment, but it's time consuming. So as you're reading the source, these are the things you want to take notes on. What kind of source is it? So is it an article? Is it an article from a journal, from a scholarly journal? Is it an article from a magazine? Is it from a book? Is it a DVD? What are we looking at? Who is the audience? Is it a scholarly source or a popular source? And on the next slide here, I'm going to show you some ways to discern whether it's scholarly or popular. Who is the author? You may have to Google the author. Some of these sources, they'll tell you who the author is. They'll say this author has a PhD in, nutrition, and that's why they're an authority on obesity. Is the author biased? Biased just means, are they arguing something in the article? So bias doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just means that they may not be objectively reporting a study. They might be, biased towards a certain point of view. What is the claim or main idea of the work? And I put claim or main idea because claim is if it's argumentative. So what is the overarching primary argument? Or if it's more of a reporting article or a study, what is the main idea of it? What is the conclusion? What reasons is the claim developed or supported, or the main idea? So what kind of support do they give in the form of reasons? And the next question asks about evidence. And you may have to remind yourself back from our rhetorical analysis assignment. Why is my thing going back? Hold on here. Evidence counts as facts, examples, studies, analogies, statistics, numbers, personal statements, authority statements. Those are the kinds of things we're talking about when we talk about evidence. What assumptions, if any, does the author make? Now, if you're dealing with a study or something that's just a list of statistics, like maybe it's like a .gov site and it's US Census data, there may be no assumptions. But most other cases are going to have assumptions. And remember that assumptions from our rhetorical analysis assignment are places where the author makes, indicates their values or their beliefs about your topic. So if we're talking about something like, the research question is, should the U.S. government or should Florida levy a tax, like a sugar tax, on sodas and sweet things in order to combat obesity? And some people might say yes, because that might deter people from buying the 57-ounce super polar big gulp, whatever it is, at Circle K, if they have to pay a little bit more for it. And other people might say, the government doesn't have the right to tax my food choices. Like, I shouldn't get penalized because I want a soda. That's not fair. If I want to make myself fat, then that's my business, that kind of thing. But those are different values and beliefs. How useful would this source be for you in building an argument? So I know you don't know yet, but I want to say, is there anything from this source you're going to take away from it? Maybe you really think the author makes a good point when they talk about the role of government in taxation, and that's what you want to take away. Maybe you think the author doesn't really say anything worthwhile. You're kind of saying, oh, I don't know, a lot of this is repeated in my other sources. Hopefully you won't, at the end of every source, say this is not going to be useful for my essay. It may be useful because it identifies an opposing view. It's probably going to be useful in some way, and your job is to identify how. So a lot of these databases that you're in do have something that says, scholarly, peer-reviewed, academic journal, something like that you can click on, and it will just filter out everything else and show you scholarly sources. So then okay, this is scholarly. But if it doesn't have that, and you want to know, is this scholarly or popular, or you just want to try to understand the differences, these are the differences. It's kind of like an information food chain is how I think about it, is a lot of the best information comes from scholarly sources. So there are academics out there, they're conducting studies, they're researching this topic for years or months, and they put out this article. And then they want to, if you're a scholar and you want to publish it in a scholarly journal, then you need to send it to that journal, and they have people who are in the field read it and tell you whether or not it's a good article. So if you found some new way to detect if people have cancer and you send it to the Journal of Cancer, they're going to have oncologists come and look at it, and they're going to say, is this guy's science correct? You know, is this a sound conclusion that he came up with? Is this demonstrate what current oncologists are concerned with in the field? And so it's a really high caliber kind of information, whereas with a popular source, you might have an editor working at a magazine or newspaper who is not a topic area expert. He's kind of a generalist. He might know a little bit, maybe he's a technology editor, and he might know a little bit about computers or something like that, but he's not an expert in that area. And so, you know, they publish things that they think usually will just sell their magazines. That's what they're more concerned with rather than the caliber of the information. So when we're finding sources, scholarly really are kind of the creme de la creme. Also, you can tell a source is scholarly sometimes because it's harder to read. It's just hard to understand. So if you get a scholarly article and you're struggling through it, please don't feel like you're dumb. You know, scholarly articles are written for other scholars in that field. So if I publish an article or if I read an article, I'm going to be reading what other English teachers who teach at colleges write about. If I'm a lawyer, I'm going to be writing for other lawyers. Now, I haven't gone to law school. You haven't gone to law school. So when we read this, there might be terms we don't understand, technical jargon, things like that, where we just really don't know what's going on. Often in scholarly sources, there's a lot more research there. There might be a bibliography at the end or some kind of list where they include their sources, footnotes. They give some kind of citation. Whereas in popular sources, sometimes they'll just say, oh, John Smith said this. And we don't know who John Smith is. We couldn't corroborate that. There's no way to follow up. Popular sources often are easier to interact with. They have images or graphs that help us to kind of like draw us in and make us want to read it. Whereas scholarly sources, it's usually lots of text. It's text heavy and it can seem kind of daunting. Here's an example. This one is kind of dated, but I'm throwing this PowerPoint together on the fly because the old link didn't work. So I'm using this older source. This is from a research question a while back where we were looking at whether or not the government should bail out private companies such as AIG and VALIC and GMC. They were struggling and people were debating about it because some people said, you know, these are too big to fail. If these companies go bankrupt, so many people are going to be unemployed that we're going to go into a giant recession. And the United States cannot afford that. So because the government has taxpayer money on hand, they can bail these companies out, and then the companies can pay back kind of those loan with interest, and everything will work out better for everybody. Then there were people from the other side who said, no, bankruptcy is the answer. And Jeffrey Mirren, this person, was saying, as you can read by the title, bankruptcy was the way to go. We should let these companies declare bankruptcy, not bail them out. So you'll see here that we've got, I think I have to do this to get you to show you so I can highlight things. I know it might be hard to read if I do this. Hold on. All right, I'm just going to circle with my cursor because I guess that's the best way. So you see these first two lines are just the works cited entry, the citation. And then this next line, and I also have this attached in a Word document and it's got it all diagrammed so you can flip to it for easier reference. The first line tells me that it's an editorial, so it's biased. It's from a news website, so it tells me what kind of source it is. It's not a book, it's not a DVD. It tells me that it's written by a Harvard economist, so that tells me the author's credibility. So if we're talking about bankruptcy, I mean, obviously a Harvard economist is probably the best I'm going to do when it comes to credibility. you might have a source written by a journalist. You might Google your person and say, oh, well, it's just a staff writer. That doesn't mean it's not a good source. It's just when you're considering all 10 sources, you might say there are some that are better than others, and usually those are the ones written by the authorities. So here is the main idea, right? He argues that a bailout plan is not a good idea and the government should remove the policies that engendered the current financial crisis or economic crisis. That's the claim of the source. And I can see this because it says he argues. Argues is a synonym for claim. You could write he claims, he asserts, or if it's not an argumentative source, you could write something like the main idea is blank. Further, he proposes that the government should let lenders fail and declare bankruptcy, and that though there may be poor credit conditions for a while afterward, the market will weather it best without government intervention. So this was kind of like a subclaim of his, or his solution. And I just put it in there because you want to be able to keep track of all these things. They're going to become important when you write your final persuasive essay, and then you can quickly look at your annotated bibliography and say, okay, you know, these are the major arguments for and against. What am I going to take from this and put in my own essay? The reasoning he offers in support of his claim is based on the idea that bad government policies are what caused the current need for a bailout, and more bad policies would lead to a worsened economy. So reasoning clues you in that I'm talking about the support. So does the word evidence in the next sentence. As evidence he cites. So I ask you to include both those things in your annotation. Miron assumes. So this tells me, you know, ding, 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 I'm targeting his assumptions. If you don't find any assumptions, you should probably mention that. You know, there were no identifiable assumptions in this source, although remember, most are going to make assumptions. And then here is where, again, there's another nod to his credibility and where I stand on the issue. I say, I don't agree that more government involvement always leads to a worsened situation. The source would be a valuable one to show the opposing view of my topic. So these last two sentences, and you don't necessarily need two, I'm just kind of wordy, is where I'm saying this is how I would use this source. I wouldn't use it to support my opinion because I disagree with Miron. I would use it to kind of show the opposing view, because you are going to have to explain the opposing view in your persuasive essay eventually. So I hope that walks you through kind of the basic steps of the annotated bibliography, and please let me know if you have any questions about this and if I can help. Thank you.